In room 12, 8-year-old Sophie Lane lifted her My Hero poster and whispered, "My dad's a Navy SEAL, and Mercy is his K-9. Miss Alder's smile didn't reach her eyes. "A SEAL," she said, loud enough to sting. The red pen circled Sophie's drawing and stamped UNVERIFIED across the top. "Now, apologize for making things up." A hush fell, until a classmate nudged a tissue toward Sophie's elbow. Under the desk, Sophie pressed her fingers to a tiny dog tag keychain and breathed a prayer for truth, not payback. Then the hallway went quiet. Boots, a leash, and a soft metal clink at the door. Cold drizzle veiled the drop-off lane, turning the sidewalks silver. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed over paper snowflakes and a bulletin board that promised, "Be kind," as if kindness were always simple. Sophie Lane stood at the front of room 12 with her poster hugged to her chest like it could keep her steady. She wasn't trying to be dramatic. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She just wanted to say what she knew. "My dad is a Navy SEAL," she began, and the words came out softer than she'd practiced. "And Mercy is his K-9. A few kids leaned forward. One boy's eyebrows lifted as if he'd just been handed a secret map. Someone in the back whispered, "Cool," and then swallowed the word like it might get them detention. Miss Alder tilted her head. Her smile stayed in the right place, but it didn't warm her eyes. "A SEAL," she repeated, lightly, as if she were tasting the word to see if it was real. Sophie nodded. She pointed to the corner of the poster where she'd drawn a little circle of metal hanging from a chain. "He always has his tags," she said, "and Mercy stays close. He says she listens with her whole body." That was when the red pen appeared. It didn't slam down. It didn't make a scene. It just tapped once. Tap, like a small gavel in a small court. Miss Alder leaned in and wrote across the top in tidy, grown-up letters. UNVERIFIED, right over Sophie's purple marker title, right through the tiny heart she'd drawn at the end. The room went still in a way Sophie could feel in her teeth. Miss Alder turned the poster slightly so the class could see the word. "This," she said, calm as a weather report, "is why we check facts. Sometimes people tell stories they've heard and, without meaning to, mix in things from television." Sophie's throat tightened. "But Miss Alder lifted a hand, gentle as a librarian. "Sophie, we're not going to argue. It's important we don't present unverified information as truth." 20 sets of eyes landed on Sophie, not cruel exactly, more curious, like she was suddenly a puzzle on the board. Sophie tried to breathe the way her mom had taught her, in through the nose, out through the mouth, slow enough to trick the body into believing everything was fine. Miss Alder's voice stayed smooth. "I'm going to ask you to apologize to the class for sharing something you can't prove." The word apologize felt too big for Sophie's mouth, like trying to swallow a stone. "I didn't." Sophie started again, but her voice broke in the middle, a tiny crack she hated. She looked at the poster and saw Mercy's drawn ears standing tall, her drawn eyes steady. Sophie had made Mercy's tail a little curved, like a question mark, because in Sophie's mind Mercy was always asking, "Are you okay?" A tissue slid onto the edge of Sophie's desk at the front row. Quiet, quick. It came from a girl named Jada who usually kept her hair in neat braids and her opinions to herself. Jada didn't look up. She just pushed the tissue with one finger, like she was sending a note in plain sight. Something in Sophie's chest loosened by half a breath. Sophie lowered her gaze and felt the tiny dog tag keychain in her pocket. Cold metal, ridged edges. Her dad had given it to her the last time he was home, pressing it into her palm and saying, "If you ever feel small, hold something solid." Under the hum of fluorescent lights, Sophie whispered the smallest prayer she knew. Not a fancy one, not a brave one, just a simple one. "God, please let the truth be seen." Then, because the room was watching and she didn't know how to make it stop, Sophie did what kids sometimes do when grown-ups are holding all the air. "I'm sorry," she said, barely louder than the paper snowflakes rustling in the vent. Miss Alder nodded once, satisfied in that clean, clipped way adults can be when they believe they've corrected something. "Thank you. You may sit." Sophie walked back to her desk on legs that felt like someone else's. She kept her face very still. If she cried, she was afraid it would look like guilt. Even at 8, she understood that in a way she shouldn't have had to. All day, the word unverified hovered above her like a cloud that refused to move on with the weather. At lunch, she opened her sandwich and stared at it as if she'd never seen bread before. The cafeteria was loud. Milk cartons popping open, sneakers squeaking, laughter bouncing off the walls, but her corner of the table felt wrapped in a hush. She lined up her apple slices in a neat row because neat things were easier than messy feelings. Jada sat 2 seats away and slid a napkin toward Sophie again, this time with a stick figure dog drawn on it and the words, "I like your dog." Sophie almost smiled. Almost. After school, she carried her poster home with both hands, even though it was too big, even though the drizzle made the edges damp. The unverified ink looked darker when it got wet, like it was soaking into the paper's bones. At the apartment, her mother was at the kitchen counter, rinsing grapes in a colander. The radio played something cheerful that didn't match Sophie's stomach. Her mom turned when she heard the door. "Hey, honey, how did it go?" Sophie didn't answer right away. She set the poster down carefully on the table like setting down a plate you don't want to break. She stood very still beside it, shoulders slightly hunched as if bracing for another correction. Her mom dried her hands on a dish towel and leaned in, eyes moving over the page. She didn't react fast. She didn't do the thing some adults do, explode first and ask questions later. She read the word, then read it again, like she was making sure it said what it said. "What does that mean?" her mom asked softly, not because she didn't understand the word, but because she was giving Sophie room to tell the story in her own shape. Sophie swallowed. She said, "I can't say it if I can't prove it." The next part came out smaller. "She made me apologize." Her mom's face changed, but only around the edges. Her eyes sharpened the way they did when a customer at the store tried to talk her into letting them pay tomorrow. She reached out and turned the poster slightly, as if she could angle the hurt into something manageable. "Did you make it up?" her mom asked. Sophie's head snapped up. For the first time all day, her voice didn't wobble. "No." Her mom nodded, slow and sure. Then she did a small, almost ordinary thing that made Sophie's lungs finally work properly. She pulled Sophie into a hug and held her there, firm but gentle, as if she were anchoring a boat. "Then you have nothing to be sorry for," her mom said into Sophie's hair. "Nothing." Sophie stayed in that circle of arms for a long moment. She could hear her mother's heartbeat, steady and stubborn. It sounded like a promise. Her mom released her and picked up the poster, turning it over. On the back, Sophie had written a sentence in careful pencil. "Mercy means kindness when someone doesn't deserve it." Her mom stared at that line, then looked at Sophie. "Did your dad tell you that?" Sophie nodded. "He said mercy helps him remember." Her mom didn't speak for a moment. She moved the grapes aside, cleared a spot on the counter, and set the poster there where it wouldn't get splashed. Then she reached for her phone, not with shaking hands, but with hands that had done hard things before. Sophie watched the screen light up. On the contact list, one name sat near the top, because it always did. Ryan Hale. Her mom didn't press call yet. She just looked at the name, then at Sophie, and said quietly, "We're going to handle this the right way." And in the stillness that followed, Sophie heard something else, faint, far off, but real, like the memory of boots in a hallway and a soft metal clink that promised tomorrow wouldn't feel the same. Sarah didn't press call until Sophie was asleep and the apartment had finally gone quiet. When Ryan Hale saw her name on his screen, something in his chest tightened the way it used to when bad news arrived in a calm voice. He set his coffee down and his fingers found the edge of his dog tags before he even answered. "Hey," he said softly, like he was stepping into a room where someone might be crying. Sarah didn't cry. That was the thing that scared him most. Her voice stayed level, controlled, as if she were reading the weather. She told him about the poster, the red ink, the word UNVERIFIED stamped over Sophie's purple letters, the apology asked for in front of the whole class. Ryan didn't interrupt. He didn't fill the gaps with anger the way some men did, the way he might have once, back when he still believed volume could solve pain. He listened until Sarah finished because he had learned the hard way that the first job of protection was not to storm in. It was to understand. When she said she made Sophie apologize, Ryan's grip on the phone tightened just enough to make his knuckles pale. For a moment, there was only the hum of the fridge on Sarah's end and, on Ryan's end, the faint hiss of radio static from the next room. Someone nearby was watching a training feed, the sound low but persistent, like a shoreline you couldn't see. Static had a way of pulling him backward. He blinked once, slow. His eyes went to the corner of the counter where his prayer card lay under a set of keys. It was thin and worn, the edges softened from years of being handled without ceremony. He didn't pick it up yet. He just looked at it, as if it could remind him who he was supposed to be in the next 30 seconds. "How's Sophie?" he asked. Sarah's pause was short, but it carried weight. "She's quiet," she said. "Not the normal quiet, the kind where you can tell she's holding something in with both hands." Ryan swallowed. He pictured Sophie the way she'd looked the last time he'd left, standing very still in the doorway, pretending her eyes weren't shiny. He hadn't missed the shine. He'd just told himself he'd make up for it later. Later had a cruel sense of timing. "I'm going to handle it," he said, and he meant it. Sarah exhaled. "Handle it how?" Ryan looked down at his tags. They lay on the counter like two small, blunt truths. The chain glinted under the kitchen light. He could almost hear the sound it made when it moved. Metal, kissing metal, soft but sharp enough to wake an old reflex. His mouth wanted to say, "I'll go in there and make them regret it." His training wanted to say, "Move fast. Take control. End the threat." But the threat wasn't a hallway. It wasn't a door that needed clearing. It was a little girl's trust in her own voice. So Ryan made himself slow down. "I'm coming in tomorrow," he said, "but I'm not doing it in front of her class. I'm not turning Sophie into a spectacle to fix a spectacle." On the other side of the line, Sarah went quiet again. Ryan knew that quiet. It was the kind that meant she was proud and tired at the same time. "She needs to know she's believed," Sarah said. "I know," Ryan answered, and the words felt like a vow. When he ended the call, he didn't move right away. He stared at the dark phone screen until his reflection stared back. Tired eyes, a jaw set too tight. He breathed in slowly through his nose, out through his mouth, the way he'd been taught when his body forgot it was safe. Then he heard it. A small clink, collar ring on tile, followed by the soft pad of paws. Mercy appeared in the doorway with a rope toy in her mouth, the kind she insisted on carrying as if it were official equipment. Her ears were up, her gaze steady. She didn't bark, didn't whine. She just stood there, watching him with the patience of a creature who didn't care what you said you were fine. Ryan let out a breath that almost became a laugh. "You've got to be kidding," he murmured. Mercy's tail gave one slow sweep. The rope toy drooped slightly, like she was offering him the world's simplest question. "Are we working, or are we healing?" He reached down and took the rope, not to play, yet just to feel something real and harmless in his hand. Mercy stepped closer and pressed her shoulder against his shin in a firm, steady lean. It wasn't affection that asked for anything. It was contact that gave. His chest loosened by a fraction. Ryan picked up the prayer card, slid it into his wallet, then lifted the tags and let them settle into his palm. The chain made that quiet metallic sound, clink, like a match struck in the dark. For an instant, his mind flashed to a different room, years ago. Not a battlefield, Not even something he talked about as a story. Just a briefing room where a young teammate had been accused of something he didn't do. Ryan had known the truth then. He'd felt it in his bones. And he'd stayed silent because speaking up would have complicated things, would have made someone in authority look wrong. It hadn't been his proudest moment. That silence had lived in him ever since, a small stone he carried without admitting it was there. Now, hearing about Sophie being told to apologize for truth, the stone felt heavier, as if the past had found a way to repeat itself through a child's mouth. "Not this time," Ryan said out loud. Mercy blinked once, slow, as if she approved of the tone. He walked down the hall to the spare room where his gear was. He didn't like calling it gear at home, because Sophie sometimes heard the word and her shoulders rose. At home, it was just a closet with practical things. Leash, papers, a clean shirt, a folder. He pulled out a thin packet he kept for moments when the world demanded proof like it was a receipt. Assignment confirmation, service ID copy, K-9 certification letter. Nothing dramatic, no photos, no stories. Just ink that said, "Yes, this is real." He set the papers on the desk and aligned the edges with the calm precision that always arrived when his emotions wanted to run. In the background, the training feed crackled again. Radio static, faint commands, distant voices. Ryan's hand paused. The static was a trigger he didn't advertise, but Mercy knew it. She rose from her spot near the doorway, crossed the room, and sat down right next to his knee, perfectly placed. Her collar ring tapped once against the floor, soft clink, then went still. Ryan rested his fingers lightly on the top of her head. Not a pat, not a reassurance for her, a reminder for him. "Easy," he whispered. Mercy's ears flicked at the sound. She stayed calm anyway, as if calm were her job and she intended to keep it. Ryan sat down and opened his phone again. He didn't text Sophie right away. He knew Sarah would already be watching over her sleep like a lighthouse. Instead, he recorded a voice message, because Sophie liked hearing his voice when the world felt wobbly. He kept his tone warm, even. Fireside warm. The kind of warm you could wrap around a sore spot without pressing too hard. "Hey, Bug," he said, using the nickname he'd never outgrown. "Mom told me today was rough. I want you to hear me clearly. You didn't do anything wrong. You told the truth. And truth doesn't have to shout to be strong." He paused, then added the piece he knew she needed most. "Tomorrow I'm going to come with you. Me and Mercy. Not to scare anyone. Not to make a scene. Just to make sure you're treated fairly. And tonight, if your thoughts start running fast, do the thing we practiced, okay? In 2, 3, out. 2, 3. Slow enough that your heart remembers it's safe." He could picture Sophie listening with her head tilted, the way she did when she was trying hard. "And one more thing," he said. "If someone doubts you, that doesn't turn you into a liar. It just means they don't know yet. We can be patient with yet." He sent the message and stared at the little delivered checkmark like it was a small prayer answered. Then he did something that would have surprised the younger version of him. He picked up Mercy's rope toy and gave it one gentle tug. Mercy's whole body brightened as if someone had turned on a lamp. She pulled back, careful, controlled, but undeniably delighted. And for the first time that night, Ryan felt a real smile press at the corner of his mouth. "Okay," he told her, voice low. "You win. 1 minute." Mercy wagged like she'd just been promoted. When the minute was up, Ryan sat again, the papers ready, the plan quiet but firm. He didn't know exactly how the school would respond. He didn't know how Ms. Alder would take being asked to correct herself. But he knew what mattered. He would walk into that building tomorrow as a father first. A man who chose restraint not because he was weak, but because he wanted his daughter to learn something better than fear. And somewhere in the apartment across town, a little girl slept with a poster drying on the counter, purple letters bruised by red ink, but still there. By morning, the truth would have company. The next morning, Sophie walked back into room 12 knowing her poster was still up there, still marked, still watched. Her stomach felt tight, but her feet kept moving anyway. She slid into her seat and curled her fingers around the tiny dog tag keychain in her pocket like it could lend her a little courage. Miss Alder began the day like nothing had happened. The calendar was flipped. The attendance was taken. The class recited the pledge with the usual offbeat chorus of voices. And then, with a smooth turn that felt rehearsed, Miss Alder said, "Before we continue, we're going to talk about reliability." Sophie's shoulders rose a fraction. Miss Alder walked to the front counter where Sophie's poster had been left overnight, edges slightly curled from the damp air. The big, red UNVERIFIED still sat across the title like a bruise. But today, Miss Alder added something new, a bright yellow sticky note placed just beneath the word where everyone could see it. Sources. She tapped the sticky note with her red pen, not harshly, just enough. "When we share information," she said, "we don't want to confuse what we know with what we assume. Even grown-ups can be misled." Sophie stared at her desk. The wood grain looked like little rivers, all flowing away from the front of the room. A boy near the window raised his hand. "But my uncle really is a firefighter," he said, suddenly defensive as if the room had learned a new way to doubt people. "Of course," Miss Alder replied pleasantly. "And if you did a project about that, we'd talk about how you learned it." Sophie's throat tightened. How I learned it, she thought. From my dad. From the way he always checks the locks twice. From the way Mercy sits like a statue when someone drops a pan. Miss Alder continued. "Sometimes a story can sound bigger than it is." Sophie didn't look up. She kept her face still. She could feel her heartbeat in her ears, loud and unfair. She touched the dog tag keychain again and remembered her dad's voice from last night. Truth doesn't have to shout to be strong. So Sophie didn't shout. She didn't cry either. Not because she wasn't hurting, but because she refused to give that word on her poster more power than it already had. The lesson moved on. Worksheets were passed out. Pencils scratched. The class returned to the normal rhythm of subtraction and quiet whispers. But Sophie felt different inside that rhythm, like she was walking along the edge of a sidewalk, careful not to step into the street. At recess, the drizzle had stopped, leaving the playground slick and shining. Kids ran anyway. They always did, as if their bodies didn't have room to store yesterday's humiliation. Sophie sat on the low curb near the fence, knees hugged close, watching the swings move like metronomes. Jada came over without announcing herself. She held 2 small cartons of milk, 1 chocolate, 1 plain. She set the chocolate one beside Sophie like it was nothing. Sophie glanced at it, surprised. "You don't even like chocolate," she murmured. Jada shrugged. "My grandma says sometimes you give the good thing away on purpose." Sophie's lips pressed together. Not quite a smile, not quite not. "Your grandma sounds bossy." "She is," Jada said, and her eyes gleamed with a proud little humor. Then she lowered her voice. "My cousin's dad is in the Navy. People think she lies, too." Sophie looked up then, just for a second. "What does she do?" Jada kicked a pebble with the toe of her sneaker. "She stopped talking about it. That's what she does." Jada's gaze slid to Sophie's hands. "But I don't think you should." Sophie swallowed. The words felt too big to hold, so she held something else instead. Jada's milk carton, cold and real in her palms. "Thanks," she said quietly. Jada nodded once and ran off before anyone could see her being kind. At lunch, Sophie tried to eat. She managed half a sandwich and 3 apple slices before her stomach said, "No more." She folded her napkin into a neat square because neatness was something she could control. When the bell rang, Sophie walked home slowly, the poster tucked under her arm, the damp air softening the paper and making the red ink look even darker. At the apartment, Sarah was at the table sorting mail into small piles. Bills in one stack, grocery coupons in another, a flyer for a school fundraiser she didn't have the energy to read. She looked up the second Sophie came in. "How was it today?" Sarah asked. Sophie hesitated, then chose honesty, because her dad had chosen it too. "She talked about reliability," Sophie said, voice flat, "and she put a sticky note on my poster. It says, 'Sources.'" Sarah's face tightened at the corners, but her voice stayed calm. "Did she make you apologize again?" Sophie shook her head. "Okay," Sarah said. "That's something." Sophie set the poster on the table. The red, Unverified, stared up at them. Sarah reached for a wet paper towel and gently wiped the top edge as if she could clean the shame off with water. It didn't come off. Sophie watched her mother's hand pause, then steady. Sarah didn't curse. She didn't slam anything. She just said softly, "We're going to respond with facts, and with dignity." Sophie's throat burned. What if she still doesn't believe me? Sarah bent down so they were eye level. "Then she'll learn," she said. "Belief isn't your job. Truth is." That afternoon, Sarah took Sophie outside to the small shared yard behind their building. The grass was patchy and damp, the kind of yard that looked like it had been promised more care than it ever received. And there, waiting by the gate, was Mercy. The German shepherd didn't bark. She didn't lunge. She stood with her leash loose and her ears up, gaze steady, like she'd been trained to hold calm the way some people held anger. Ryan wasn't far behind her, wearing plain clothes, not uniform. No drama, no spotlight. Just a man with tired eyes and a posture that didn't know how to slouch. Sophie stopped in the doorway, surprised enough that her breath caught. Ryan crouched, not all the way down, just enough to meet her where she was. "Hey, bug," he said softly. Sophie stepped forward and pressed into him, careful at first, then fully, as if her body had been waiting all day for a safe place to land. Ryan held her without squeezing too tight. The hug was steady, not desperate, like a promise made with muscles instead of words. Then Mercy moved closer, slow and respectful. Sophie reached out and rested her hand on Mercy's head. The fur was warm, slightly damp from the air, and solid in a way that made Sophie's shoulders drop. "She's really calm," Sophie whispered. Ryan's mouth twitched. "That's because she's smarter than me." Sophie let out a small sound that might have been a laugh if she trusted it enough. Ryan sat on the porch step, and Sophie sat beside him with the poster across their knees. Sarah stood nearby, arms folded, watching like a lighthouse. "Tell me what you want to say," Ryan said, not "tell me what happened," not "tell me what she did," just "tell me what you want to say." Sophie stared at the poster. The red word felt like a dare. "I want to say he's my hero," she said, voice barely there. "But when I say it now, it feels like I'm asking permission." Ryan's eyes softened. "You don't need permission to love your dad," he said, "and you don't need permission to tell the truth." Sophie picked at the torn corner of the poster where the drizzle had made the paper weak. "It ripped," she said, suddenly embarrassed, like even the paper had failed. Ryan took a roll of the clear tape from his pocket, because of course he had tape, and tore off a strip with one clean motion. He smoothed the corner back into place without making a big deal out of it. "Want to add something?" he asked. Sophie hesitated. Then she took a pencil and wrote in small letters along the bottom edge, just under Mercy's drawn pause. "Truth is gentle." She sat back and looked at it, like she'd planted something tiny in a place that had felt barren. Mercy lowered herself onto the grass with a slow exhale and rested her head on her paws, eyes half-lidded, peaceful. Sophie watched the dog breathe and found her own breath copying it without thinking. Ryan's fingers brushed the dog tags tucked under his shirt, just once. An absent motion, almost a flinch, almost a habit. Sophie noticed it. "Does it bother you," Sophie asked quietly, "when people don't believe you?" Ryan didn't answer right away. He looked toward the yard fence as if the right words were hanging there somewhere. Then he looked back at Sophie. "It bothers me when people don't believe you," he said, "because you're a kid. You shouldn't have to carry that." Sophie nodded as if she understood, and as if she didn't. Not fully, not yet. Zara cleared her throat gently. "Ryan," she said, a warning and a question all at once. Ryan gave a small nod. "Tomorrow morning," he said, calm and certain. "I'm going to the front office first. I'm going to ask for a private meeting. We're going to do this without making Sophie stand in front of the room again." Sophie looked down at Mercy, then back at her dad. "Will she be mad?" Ryan's voice stayed low. "She might," he admitted, "but being mad isn't the same as being right." Sophie's fingers tightened around the poster's edge. "What if she says I have to apologize again?" Ryan leaned closer and his tone turned even softer. Fireside soft, the kind that warmed without burning. "Then you can say this," he told her. "You can say, 'I'm sorry you felt confused. But I'm not sorry I told the truth.' And if that feels too hard, you can just look at me, and I'll speak for you." Sophie blinked fast. She didn't want to cry. She also didn't want to be made of stone anymore. She rested her hand on Mercy's head again and whispered, almost to the dog, "Okay." Mercy's ear flicked as if she'd heard a command. She stayed calm anyway, because calm was what she gave. That evening, after dinner, Sophie carried the poster to her room and propped it against the wall where she could see it from bed. The red "UNVERIFIED" was still there, but so was her new line. "Truth is gentle." And downstairs Ryan sat at the kitchen table with a thin folder of papers aligned like a quiet plan, ready to walk into a school building with the calmest words he owned. Tomorrow the hallway would be quieter than anyone expected. By morning, the poster in Sophie's room had dried into a stiff, bruised kind of courage. She woke with her stomach tight, Ryan's plan already sitting in the air between them, and she kept one hand in her pocket around the little dog tag keychain. At the curb, Ryan checked Mercy's leash clip once, small, precise, then offered Sophie his free hand without saying a word. The rain had upgraded itself overnight. Not a gentle drizzle anymore. This was the kind that fell in sheets, turning the school parking lot into a mirror and every jacket into a damp apology. Parents clustered under umbrellas, calling quick goodbyes. A few kids ran through puddles like they'd discovered treasure. Sophie walked carefully, as if stepping wrong might make yesterday happen again. Ryan didn't rush her. He moved with that calm, measured pace that made people assume he always had time, even when he didn't. Mercy stayed close at his left, leash loose, ears up, gaze steady. She didn't pull toward other children. She didn't stare. She simply was, like a quiet rule the world could follow. Inside the front office, the air smelled like wet backpacks and printer toner. The receptionist looked up, eyes flicking to Mercy, then to Ryan's face. For half a second, Sophie saw the familiar adult decision forming. Is this allowed? Is this trouble? Ryan removed his cap and held it under his arm, respectful without being performative. "Good morning," he said, voice low. "I'm here to request a private meeting. I'm Sophie Lane's father." The receptionist's expression shifted. Parents said meeting all the time. Usually it meant someone had cheated on spelling or traded snacks like contraband. But this felt different. Not because Ryan was loud, he wasn't, but because he looked like a man who had learned how to wait without backing down. "We don't usually allow dogs," the receptionist began, already reaching for a laminated binder as if rules were sacred text. "She's a working K9, Ryan replied evenly. "She'll stay beside me. We'll be in and out." Sophie held her breath. She hated this part, the moment adults decided whether your reality was convenient enough to count. The receptionist hesitated, then glanced past them toward the hallway where the lights flickered once, twice, like a tired eyelid. As if the building itself was undecided. A low buzz rolled through the ceiling. The fluorescent panels dimmed, brightened, dimmed again. Somewhere deeper in the school, a child squealed, half playful, half startled. Then the lights went out. For a heartbeat, the office went gray and still. The computer monitors blinked dead. The copier gave a sad, final click as if it had been mid-thought. And then, the emergency alarm chirped. Not the full screaming kind, but a sharp repeating beep that felt like a tiny hammer on Sophie's nerves. The sound made something in Ryan's shoulders tighten, the way muscles remembered old things faster than the mind could explain them. Sophie saw his jaw set. She also saw him choose not to move like a spring. Mercy sat. Just like that. Smooth, quiet, perfectly placed at Ryan's left leg, her posture calm enough to borrow. Her collar ring gave a soft clink against the tile, then went still. Sophie's breathing hitched. She looked at Mercy and copied her. Still body, slow breath. The receptionist exhaled. "Power's been acting up," she said, voice suddenly smaller. "Storm last night, something about a transformer." A door down the hall opened. A man stepped out with a flashlight in his hand as if he'd been expecting the world to go dim at any moment. He was in his 50s, sleeves rolled to his elbows, tie loosened like he'd learned not to pretend he enjoyed it. His eyes went first to Sophie, then to Ryan, then to Mercy, and instead of flinching, his face softened as if he understood the language of calm animals. "I'm Keen," he said, offering his hand to Ryan. "Assistant principal. Looks like the building chose today to test everyone's patience." Ryan shook his hand once, firm but not crushing. "Ryan Hale, I'm here about my daughter." Mr. Keen nodded, then looked down at Sophie. "Hi, Sophie. That beep annoy you too?" Sophie blinked. Adults didn't usually admit annoyance. It made him feel safer, somehow. She gave a small nod. Mr. Keen reached into his pocket and pulled out a wrapped peppermint. He didn't offer it like a bribe. He offered it like a small kindness that didn't require a speech. "For the beep," he said simply. Sophie took it with both hands. The wrapper crackled. It was the loudest sound she'd made all morning. In the hallway, more voices rose. A teacher called for students to line up. A child cried, quick and sharp, like a balloon popping inside a chest. Ryan's gaze shifted toward the sound, not in panic, but in assessment. Mercy's ears flicked, tracking the movement like she was reading invisible subtitles. Sophie felt the urge to cling to her father's sleeve, but she didn't. She held the peppermint and stayed where he'd placed her, close, but not hidden. Mr. Keen glanced toward the hallway again. "We've got kids getting nervous," he said. "We can talk in my office, private, quiet. And," he added, looking at Mercy with a faint smile, "apparently with better emotional regulation than most adults." The receptionist made a sound that might have been a laugh if she'd had permission. They walked, Ryan first, Sophie beside him, Mercy at his left. The hall was dim enough that faces looked softer, less sharp. Teachers stood in doorways, gathering children like shepherds gathering anxious sheep. When a locker door slammed somewhere in the darkness, Sophie flinched. Ryan didn't scold her for it. He just lowered his hand, palm open, and Sophie slid her fingers into it like it had been waiting. In one classroom doorway, Ms. Alder stood with her arms crossed, trying to keep her voice calm as her students whispered and shifted. Her eyes landed on Ryan, then Mercy, and something in her posture changed, stiffened, then recalculated. Not fear, exactly. More like the uncomfortable feeling of being seen clearly. Ryan didn't look at her long. He didn't march toward her. He didn't give her the satisfaction of a dramatic entrance. He kept walking. Sophie saw it and felt something new. Her father wasn't here to win a show. He was here to restore something quiet and important, like putting a picture back into its frame. Mr. Keen's office smelled like coffee and paper. The window rattled faintly with the wind, and the blinds swayed like they were whispering to each other. He gestured to a chair for Sophie and another for Ryan, then stepped to a shelf and pulled out a battery lantern, clicking it on with a warm glow that made the room feel less like a place of trouble. Mercy lay down at Ryan's feet without being told, chin on paws, breathing slow. The steady rise and fall of her ribs made Sophie's chest loosen by degrees. Mr. Keene sat across from them and folded his hands. On his right hand he wore a ring with a worn engraving, so faded Sophie couldn't read it. Ryan noticed it anyway, eyes narrowing for just a moment, like a memory tugged his sleeve. "All right," Mr. Keene said. "Tell me what happened, and tell me what you want now." Ryan opened a thin folder, edges aligned, pages dry despite the storm outside. He slid a single sheet across the desk first, simple confirmation of his assignment, nothing showy. Then another, Mercy's certification. He didn't push them like weapons. He offered them like receipts for a truth that shouldn't have needed receipts. "I'm not here for special treatment," Ryan said. "I'm here because my daughter was publicly labeled a liar. She was told to apologize for telling the truth." Sophie's fingers tightened around the peppermint. The wrapper crinkled again. She hated the sound, but she couldn't stop. Mr. Keene's eyes flicked to Sophie. "Sophie," he said gently, "did you feel humiliated?" The question was so plain, so honest, that Sophie didn't know how to dodge it. She nodded once. Then, because the nod wasn't enough, she whispered, "I felt small." The word dropped into the room like a pebble into still water. Mr. Keene inhaled slowly. "I'm sorry," he said, and it didn't sound like a scripted apology. It sounded like a man who meant it. Ryan's hand rested on the edge of the desk. Sophie noticed his fingers were steady, but the tendon at his jaw pulsed once. A quiet anger lived there, contained, controlled, not denied. "I'm asking for a private correction," Ryan said, "and I'm asking that questioning a child's family story, especially service, be handled privately from now on. No labels in front of classmates, no forced apologies, no shame used as a teaching tool." Mr. Keene nodded again, slower this time. "That's reasonable." A gust rattled the window. Somewhere down the hall the emergency beep changed tone, faster now, as if the building were getting impatient. Mr. Keene glanced toward the door. "We might have to relocate some classes if the power doesn't stabilize," he said. "But this—" He tapped the papers lightly. "We can address today." Sophie's throat tightened. "Today?" she asked before she could stop herself. Mr. Keene looked at her and gave a small, steady smile. "Yes, today. Not tomorrow, not after it's convenient." Sophie felt tears threaten, not the hot, embarrassing kind, but the kind that came when you realized you'd been holding your breath for too long. She pressed the peppermint to her lips, not eating it, just holding it there like a tiny anchor. Mr. Keene leaned back, eyes thoughtful. "Ms. Alder is thorough," he said carefully. "Sometimes thorough turns into harsh when someone thinks they're protecting standards." Ryan's gaze didn't harden. If anything, it softened in a way Sophie didn't expect. "Standards don't require humiliation," he replied. Mr. Keene's ring caught the lantern light. His thumb rubbed the engraving absent-mindedly, like he did it when he was trying to choose the right thing instead of the easy thing. "I'm going to speak with her," he said. "And Sophie," he added, turning back to the little girl, "you will not be asked to apologize again. For truth." Sophie let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Mercy's tail tapped once against the carpet, soft like punctuation. Then, from the hallway, a new sound rose. A sharper cry, closer now. A child calling a name, frantic and thin. "Ethan! Ethan!" Mr. Keene stood quickly. Ryan was already on his feet, not rushing, but ready. Mercy's head lifted, ears forward, calm, still intact. Mr. Keene opened the office door, voice firm but not loud. "Who's missing?" A teacher's voice answered, strained. "Second grade. One of the kids went to the restroom during the power flicker and didn't come back. We can't find him. The hallway lights—" Ryan didn't say, "Let me handle it." He didn't claim the moment. He just looked down at Mercy and gave one quiet word. "Find." Mercy rose like a promise kept, and Sophie watched her father step into the dim hallway, not as a man arriving to freeze a classroom, but as a man choosing, again and again, to use his steadiness for something gentle. And as they moved, Sophie realized something that made her heart thump in a new way. Today wasn't only about being believed, it was about what her father did with the power to be believed. The hallway felt like a long, dim throat, voices echoing, footsteps slipping on wet tile, a thin edge of fear sharpening every sound. "Ethan," a teacher called again, the name cracking on the second syllable. Ryan didn't take over the scene. He didn't bark orders. He simply stepped into the current of chaos and slowed it down by existing in it differently. Mercy moved first. Her nose dipped, then lifted. She took 2 small circles near the restroom doors where the light was weakest, as if reading a sentence written in scent. A faint clink sounded somewhere behind them. Keys, maybe, and Ryan's hand twitched toward his dog tags before he stopped himself. He kept his fingers open at his side instead, palm relaxed, the way you do when you don't want fear to jump from you to everyone else. A second-grade teacher wrung her hands. He went in right when the lights flickered. He's little. He might be scared." "Okay," Ryan said, and the word did something simple. It gave the room permission to breathe. Mercy's ears angled left. She started down the hall at a steady trot, not rushing, not hesitating. Ryan followed. Mr. Keene kept pace on the other side, flashlight cutting a pale cone through the gloom. Behind them, adults trailed like a worried flock, trying not to make the hallway louder than it already was. They passed the library. The door was partly open, and inside, the glow of a battery lantern made the shelves look like dark teeth. Mercy paused, nose working, then continued. At the end of the corridor, a janitor's closet sat with its door pulled almost shut. Almost, but not fully latched. A thin wedge of darkness, a place small enough to feel like a trap if you were 8 or 7, or simply alone. Mercy stopped. Her tail stilled. She pressed her nose to the crack. From inside came a sound so small it was nearly nothing. A breath caught, then released. Ryan didn't yank the door. He didn't announce himself like a storm. He crouched so his voice would be low and less frightening, and he spoke to the dark the way he spoke to Sophie when she woke from a bad dream. "Hey, buddy," he said gently. "It's okay. You're not in trouble." A pause. Then a whisper. I can't find my class." Mr. Keene's flashlight softened as he angled it away from the crack so it wouldn't blast straight into frightened eyes. "Ethan," he said, relief trembling through his steadiness. "We're right here. You did the smart thing by staying put." The closet door opened a few inches more. A small face appeared in the gap, tear tracks on cheeks, lips pressed tight like he'd been trying not to make a sound. Ryan held out his hand, not reaching in, just offering. Mercy sat beside him, perfectly still, a calm statue with warm breath. Ethan's eyes went to Mercy first. Not fear, curiosity, like his body recognized safety before his mind could name it. Is she nice?" he whispered. "She's very nice," Ryan said. "Her name is Mercy." Ethan blinked. "Like Mercy in church?" Mr. Keene let out a breath that sounded like a laugh and a sigh had collided. "Exactly like that," he said. Ethan's shoulders loosened by a fraction. He scooted forward until he was close enough to touch Mercy's fur. He did it with 2 fingers first, testing the world, then with his whole hand. Mercy didn't move. She just stayed present, accepting the touch as if it was part of the job. Ryan waited until Ethan's breathing slowed. Then he guided him out of the closet with a gentle hand on his shoulder. Not pulling, not pushing. The boy stepped into the hallway's dimness and looked around as if the building had changed shape while he was gone. A teacher rushed forward. "Ethan! Oh my—" Mr. Keene lifted one hand. "Easy," he said softly. "He's safe. Let's keep safe." It worked. The teacher stopped herself from squeezing Ethan too hard. She knelt instead, wiping his face with her sleeve. "You scared me," she whispered. Ethan's chin trembled. "I got scared first," he admitted. Ryan stood back, giving the moment room to belong to the people who needed it. He felt eyes turn toward him, the way eyes did when someone expected a hero pose. He didn't give them one. He looked down at Mercy instead, and his fingers touched the top of her head. Light pressure. A quiet thank you. Her collar ring made the faintest clink as she shifted, then stilled again. Mr. Keene turned to Ryan, voice low. "Thank you," he said. And there was something else behind it. Recognition. "You didn't have to." Ryan's mouth tightened not with pride but with something older. "I know," he said. "I wanted to." They began walking back toward the office. The hallway felt less sharp now, the way air feels after you open a window. Teachers guided kids with calmer voices. Someone joked weakly about the building being dramatic, and even that little bit of humor loosened shoulders. But as they passed room 12 again, Sophie saw Miss Alder in her doorway. Sophie had been standing near the wall, waiting where her mother had told her to stay. She watched Ethan being led away, watched Mercy's steady gait, watched her father's calm hands. She felt proud, then immediately afraid of being proud, as if pride invited punishment. Miss Alder's eyes met Sophie's for the briefest moment. Whatever Miss Alder had been holding on to, certainty, control, the comfort of being the one who decided what was true, had cracked, not shattered, cracked. Enough to let light in if she didn't cover it up too quickly. Mr. Keene didn't waste the opening. Back in his office, he closed the door and set the lantern more squarely on the desk. The warm glow made the room feel almost human again. "Miss Alder's coming," he said quietly. "I asked her to join us. Not to argue, to listen." Sophie's stomach fluttered. She sat in the chair with her peppermint still in her hand, wrapper now worn from worry. Ryan stayed beside her, not looming, just present. Mercy lay at his feet, head turned slightly toward Sophie, as if keeping one eye on her breath. When the knock came, it was cautious. Ms. Alder stepped in with her shoulders rigid and her face carefully composed, but her hands told on her. They were clasped too tight, fingers pressing into each other like she was trying to hold herself together. She looked at the papers on Mr. Keene's desk, then at Mercy, then at Sophie. She didn't start with the defense. That alone surprised Sophie. Mr. Keene gestured to the chair. "Sit," he said gently. Ms. Alder sat. Ryan didn't speak first. He let the room settle like a pond after a stone. He'd learned that rushing into a difficult moment could turn truth into a weapon, and he wasn't here to weaponize anything against a woman in a cardigan. Mr. Keene slid Ryan's documents a few inches toward Miss Alder. "These confirm what Sophie shared," he said. Miss Alder's gaze flicked over the pages. Her jaw tightened, then released. "I see," she said, and the words came out smaller than her usual classroom voice. Sophie held her breath. Miss Alder looked up. "Sophie," she said, and hearing her name from that mouth made Sophie's fingers tighten around the peppermint until the wrapper crackled. Miss Alder paused when she heard it, as if the sound reminded her that children were not paperwork. "I owe you an apology," she said. Sophie's eyes widened. She didn't move. She wasn't sure she was allowed to accept good things. Not yet. Miss Alder's throat worked. "I handled your presentation wrong," she continued. "I shouldn't have labeled you in front of your classmates. I shouldn't have asked you to apologize." Ryan's gaze stayed steady. Not cold, not soft, just clear. Miss Alder swallowed, then said the part that wasn't comfortable. "And I need to tell you why," she added, turning slightly toward Mr. Keene as if asking permission to be human in a room where humans had rules. Mr. Keene nodded once. Briefly, he said, and responsibly. Miss Alder's eyes dropped to her hands. "A few years ago," she said, "I had a friend who claimed service that wasn't real. He used it to get sympathy, money, attention. He told stories that sounded noble." Her mouth tightened with a memory that still made her stomach twist. "When I found out, I felt foolish, like I'd been careless." She looked at Sophie again, and for a moment her voice lost its edge completely. "So, when you spoke yesterday, something in me decided to protect the class from being fooled." She exhaled. "But I didn't protect anyone. I hurt you." Silence held the room. Sophie expected her dad to pounce on the confession like it was proof of guilt. He didn't. Instead, Ryan's eyes flicked briefly to the prayer card in his wallet, the tiny corner that peeked from the leather. He remembered a different silence years ago, the one he'd chosen in that briefing room, the one that had left someone else carrying shame alone. His chest tightened with the old thought, "I should have said something." He could make Miss Alder pay. He could demand consequences loud enough to satisfy every wounded part of him. He could also choose the harder thing, protect Sophie's dignity without turning another person into a public lesson. Ryan breathed out slowly. Then he spoke, voice low and deliberate. "Your reason explains your fear," he said. "It doesn't excuse your behavior." Miss Alder's face flushed. She nodded as if she'd expected that line, needed it. Ryan continued, "My daughter doesn't need you to believe in seals. She needs you to believe in her." He paused, then added, softer, "She needs school to be a place where truth is handled with care." Mr. Keene leaned forward. "Here's what we can do," he said. "We can correct the record today." Miss Alder's eyes darted to Sophie, then away again. "In class?" she asked, and something like dread lived in the question. Sophie's stomach twisted. The idea of being mentioned again in front of everyone, the spotlight, the whispers, made her throat close. Ryan caught it. He could see it in her shoulders the way they rose as if bracing for impact. So he made his choice. "No," Ryan said calmly, "not the way it was done before." He looked at Mr. Keene. "Any correction should be short, respectful, and it should not turn Sophie into a spectacle." Then he looked at Miss Alder. "You can own your mistake without putting her on display." Mr. Keene nodded. "A brief statement," he said. "No names beyond what's necessary. And Sophie," he turned to her, "you get a say." Sophie blinked. I do." "Yes," Mr. Keene said simply. "You do." Sophie's fingers loosened around the peppermint. She didn't speak right away. She looked down at Mercy, then at her father's hand resting near the edge of the desk. Steady, open, not clenched. She felt something unfamiliar and warm. Choice. Miss Alder leaned forward slightly, voice quiet. "Sophie," she said again, and this time the name sounded different. Less like a label, more like a person. "I'm sorry I made you feel small." Sophie's eyes burned. She blinked fast. "I didn't make it up," she whispered. "I know," Miss Alder said, and her voice cracked just enough to be real. "I know now." Ryan watched Sophie's face, waiting. He didn't speak for her. He didn't rush her. Finally, Sophie swallowed and said, "I don't want everyone staring again." Mr. Keene nodded. "Then we won't," he said. Miss Alder's shoulders dropped a fraction, like someone had loosened a belt after holding their breath too long. "I can speak to the class generally," she offered, "about asking questions privately, about not humiliating anyone." Ryan held her gaze. "And you will remove the label," he said, "not as a threat, as a boundary." Miss Alder nodded again. "Yes." Mr. Keene reached for a notepad and began writing. "We'll also create a policy," he said, practical now. "If a teacher has concerns about a student's presentation, verification happens privately, with families, through the office, no public stamps, no forced apologies." He looked up. Agreed. Ryan nodded. Sarah, standing near the door, exhaled like she'd been waiting for that sentence all week. Ms. Alder pressed her lips together, then said, Agreed. The emergency beep in the hallway slowed, then stopped, as if the building itself had decided to cooperate. In the sudden quiet, Mr. Keene glanced at Ryan's wallet on the desk, just for a second, at the worn corner of the prayer card peeking out. His eyes softened in a way that suggested recognition. "Where did you get that?" Mr. Keene asked quietly, almost to himself. Ryan didn't answer right away. He slid the wallet closer, protective, without being secretive. "My mother gave it to me," he said. "A long time ago." Mr. Keene's thumb rubbed the engraving on his ring again. "Mine too," he murmured, and the words landed like a small bridge between strangers. Sophie watched them, confused, but comforted by the fact that adults could be connected by something gentle. Mr. Keene set his pen down. "All right," he said. "We'll do the correction today. And Sophie," he looked at her with calm seriousness, "you can decide tomorrow whether you want to share your project again, or if you want it displayed quietly without another presentation." Sophie's heart thumped. Tomorrow. Another choice. She glanced at her dad. Ryan didn't nod for her. He didn't steer her. He simply looked back with that steady certainty that said, "You are not alone, and you are not wrong." Sophie turned to Mr. Keene and whispered, "Can I think about it?" Mr. Keene smiled. "That's the wisest thing you've said all day," he replied, and for the first time since the red pen had scarred her purple letters, Sophie felt the tiniest shift inside her, like the world was making room for her voice again. Outside the office door, footsteps moved down the hall, calmer now. Somewhere nearby, a classroom door closed softly instead of slamming, and in Sophie's pocket, the tiny dog tag keychain rested against her fingers, cold metal, solid truth, waiting for tomorrow. The power came back just after lunch, and with it came the thing everyone had been avoiding. Sophie's poster was still in room 12, still marked, still waiting. Her stomach fluttered like it had swallowed a small bird. She kept one hand on Mercy's warm fur for a moment longer before letting go. Mr. Keene walked Sophie, Sarah, Ryan, and Mercy to the classroom door and stopped there, not entering like an announcement. "I'll be right outside," he told Ms. Alder, voice even. Then he looked down at Sophie. "You don't have to stand in front of anyone," he said quietly. "You can choose." Sophie nodded, but her throat wouldn't cooperate with words. Miss Alder was already at the front of the room when the bell settled. The students took their seats with that restless, post-storm energy. Kids who'd heard the beeping, seen teachers hurry, felt the building go strange. A few whispered about Ethan, about the dark hallway, about the dog who found him. Mercy lay down near the doorway just inside the room, as still as a shadow. She didn't stare at the children. She didn't perform. She simply breathed, slow and steady, like a metronome set to peace. Ryan stayed near the back wall, hands clasped loosely, not in charge of the room and not pretending he was. Sarah stood beside him, close enough to touch Sophie if Sophie drifted too far into her own fear. Miss Alder cleared her throat. Her voice sounded different without the red pen in her hand. "Before we begin," she said, "I need to correct something from yesterday." A few heads turned toward Sophie automatically. Sophie's cheeks warmed. She stared hard at the corner of her desk, willing the wood grain to be more interesting than her own heartbeat. "Ms." Alder held up a single sheet of paper, blank on the back, simple on the front. "Yesterday, I handled a student's presentation in a way that wasn't fair," she said. "I asked questions publicly that should have been asked privately." The room quieted. Not the tense kind of quiet, more like listening. Miss Alder continued, carefully, as if each sentence had to be gentle enough not to bruise anyone further. "In this classroom, we do not label people. We do not use embarrassment as a lesson. If a teacher has concerns about a project, we handle it with the office and with families, without putting a student on the spot. A boy near the window raised his hand halfway, then changed his mind. A girl in the second row stopped twisting her braid. Even the class clown seemed unsure where to put his jokes. Miss C. Alder's eyes flicked toward Sophie, then away, not to ignore her but to keep Sophie from feeling pinned. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "That was my mistake." Something loosened in Sophie's chest, just enough to let a full breath in. Ms. Alder walked to the side counter where the poster had been propped. She lifted it carefully, like it mattered. The red UNVERIFIED still sat across the top, stark and heavy. The bright, sticky note that asked sources was still there too, like a little yellow spotlight. Ms. Alder didn't make a speech about it. She just peeled the sticky note off slowly and set it in the trash can without theatrics. Then she reached into a drawer and pulled out a new sheet of white paper, already printed with a clean title strip. My hero project, student work. She held it up so the class could see. "I'm replacing the label I put on this," she said, voice steady, "because it wasn't mine to put there." She covered the red word with the new title strip, smoothing it down with both palms. The red ink didn't disappear completely. There was a faint shadow beneath the paper like a scar under a bandage, but it was no longer the headline. Sophie swallowed. She didn't know why that mattered so much, but it did. Miss Alder turned back to the class. "Now," she said, "we're going to continue our lesson, and we're going to continue it with respect." A hand shot up near the back. "Can Mercy stay?" a boy asked, wide-eyed, as if he'd just realized the dog was real. A few kids giggled nervously, the kind of giggle that's really relief trying to come out. Miss Alder hesitated. Her gaze went to Mr. Keene in the doorway. He gave a small nod. "As long as Mercy remains calm and stays with Mr. Hale," Miss Alder said. "Yes." Mercy didn't react, as if the permission wasn't about her at all. Her tail made one slow, polite sweep against the floor, then went still again. Sophie's fingers found her dog tag keychain in her pocket. Cold metal. Solid. She pressed it once, like a button that reminded her she was real. Ms. Alder's voice softened. "Sophie," she said, not loud, not sharp, "you have a choice. If you'd like to share your project again at any point, you may. If you'd rather not, we can display it quietly. Either way, your work belongs here." All the air in the room seemed to pause, waiting for Sophie to decide what kind of brave she could afford today. Sophie stood up slowly, not because she suddenly loved attention, not because the fear had vanished, because something in her didn't want to go home carrying the same smallness. She didn't walk to the front. She stayed beside her desk, close to her chair, close to her own space. She held the poster against the edge of her tabletop like a shield and a window at the same time. "My hero is my dad," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. "He's not loud about it." A couple kids leaned in. No one laughed. She glanced at Mercy just for a heartbeat. The dog's calm didn't cheer for her. It simply held the room steady. "My dad teaches Mercy to find people," Sophie continued. "Like, if someone is missing, and Mercy helps him stay calm too." She paused, then added the part that mattered most, the part that was hers and no one else's. "He tells me being brave isn't always yelling. Sometimes it's telling the truth even when it feels lonely." A silence followed, not awkward, not cruel, just listening. Then a small voice piped up from the second row. "Does Mercy know math?" a girl asked seriously as if it was a reasonable question. A ripple of laughter moved through the room, soft, harmless, the kind that didn't hurt anyone. Even Sophie's mouth twitched. Ryan felt something in his chest unclench. The laughter didn't erase yesterday, but it changed the shape of it. Ms. Alder let the laughter pass without snapping it shut. When it quieted, she said, "Thank you, Sophie." And she didn't tack on a lecture. She didn't make it about her authority. She simply gave Sophie the words she should have given in the first place. Sophie sat down, hands trembling slightly in her lap. Sarah's fingers brushed the top of Sophie's head as she passed behind her on the way out, a touch so light it was almost nothing, and that made it everything. Ryan's gaze flicked to his dog tags beneath his shirt. He felt the familiar guilt rise, the old thought that still came at odd times. I should have spoken up sooner. For someone else. For myself. He breathed in. Mercy's steady presence anchored him, like she'd done 100 times without anyone noticing. He chose the present, this classroom, this child, this moment, over the past that kept trying to grab his sleeve. When the lesson resumed, Mr. Keene motioned Ryan and Sarah into the hall. Miss Alder followed a minute later, stepping out as if the air outside might be easier. She didn't defend herself now. She looked tired in a way Sophie had never seen before. "I need to ask you something," Miss Alder said to Ryan, voice low. "Not as a teacher trying to be right, as a person trying to do better." Ryan waited. Miss Alder swallowed. "When you heard what I did, how did you keep from tearing the room apart?" Ryan's eyes held hers, steady, not punishing. "Because my daughter was already torn up," he said. "She didn't need more noise. She needed steadiness." Miss Alder nodded slowly as if she were filing the sentence somewhere deep. Mr. Keene cleared his throat. "We're drafting a new guideline for staff," he said. "Would you—" He hesitated, then tried again. "Would you be willing to review it? Not as a soldier, as a parent who understands dignity." Ryan's first instinct was to say no. Not because he didn't care, but because he was tired, because every extra request always landed on the people already carrying too much. Then he looked through the classroom window and saw Sophie. Head bent over her paper, pencil moving, shoulders a little lower than yesterday. He made his redemption choice without turning it into a speech. "Yes," he said, "I'll help." Miss Alder let out a breath she'd been holding. "Thank you," she whispered, and for the first time the words didn't sound like a transaction. They sounded like a turning. Ryan nodded once. Then he looked toward the classroom door where Mercy lay, still calm, still present, as if her name wasn't just a name. Mercy. And in that hallway, under flickering lights that finally stayed steady, Ryan felt something he hadn't expected from a school meeting. Not victory. Grace. The red label was gone, the record quietly corrected, and the classroom had moved on. Sophie still felt the echo of yesterday in her ribs, but it no longer owned the whole space. At breakfast, she unwrapped Mr. Keene's peppermint and set it beside her plate like a tiny trophy of survival. Ryan watched her do it without commenting, because he'd learned that the smallest rituals sometimes held the biggest healing. Outside, the storm had spent itself. The sky was pale and rinsed clean, and the apartment smelled faintly of toast and dish soap and the kind of ordinary that felt like a blessing when you'd been bracing for impact. Sophie didn't talk much on the drive to school, but her silence was different now. Less collapsed, more thoughtful. She stared out the window and traced shapes in the fog on the glass with her finger, then looked down at the dog tag keychain in her lap, as if checking that it still existed. Mercy rode in the back seat, head resting near the gap between the seats, breathing steady. Every so often her collar ring made the softest clink when the car turned, and Sophie didn't flinch this time. She simply glanced back and murmured, "Hi," like Mercy was a friend who didn't ask hard questions. At drop-off, Ryan didn't walk Sophie to the classroom door. He stopped at the gate, letting her own the last stretch. He didn't want her courage to be borrowed from him forever. He wanted it to grow inside her where no teacher could mark it with a pen. Sophie adjusted her backpack strap and looked up at him. "You're still here after school?" she asked. "I'll be here," Ryan said. She nodded, then did something small that made Sarah's throat tighten later when she told the story. Sophie reached out and patted Mercy's head once, confident, casual, then turned and walked toward the building without looking back. Inside the office, Mr. Keene greeted Ryan with a tired smile and a fresh stack of papers. "Draft policy," he said. "Short, clear, no fancy words." Ryan took the pages and scanned them, not like a soldier reading orders, but like a father reading a promise someone else had written for his child. Mercy lay down by the doorway, chin on paws, eyes half-lidded. Every time someone walked past too fast, her ears flicked, then settled again. Mr. Keene's voice lowered. "I also spoke to Miss Alder," he added. "She asked to write Sophie a note, not to explain, just to apologize properly." Ryan paused. "She can," he said, "as long as it doesn't make Sophie responsible for making her feel better." Mr. Keene nodded. "Agreed." They spent 20 minutes polishing language that should never have needed polishing. Questions about student presentations must be handled privately. No public labels, no forced apologies, no humiliation as instruction. Ryan suggested one extra line, simple and sharp. Dignity is not a reward for being correct. It is a right. Mr. Keene wrote it down as if it relieved him to see the sentence exist. "Next week," Mr. Keene said, "we're doing a short staff training. Would you be willing to—" Ryan held up a hand. He wasn't refusing. He was measuring. His instinct was to protect his time the way he protected oxygen on a long swim, carefully. He thought of Sophie's shoulders yesterday, lifted like they were holding a backpack full of stones. He thought of Ethan's trembling fingers on Mercy's fur. "I'll do it," he said, "but I'm not coming in to inspire anyone. I'm coming in to explain what not to do to a kid." Mr. Keene's smile turned wry. "That's actually perfect." As Ryan stood to leave, Mercy rose with him, then did something entirely unmilitary. She nudged the corner of Mr. Keene's desk with her nose and gently picked up a stray glove someone had dropped. She carried it 2 steps and set it at Mr. Keene's feet like she'd just filed paperwork. Mr. Keene stared at the glove. "Is she always this helpful?" Ryan's mouth twitched. "Only when someone's watching." Mercy's tail gave one slow wag, like she understood the joke and approved of it. In the afternoon, Sophie's class was quieter than usual. The day after a storm always had that feel, like everyone was tired from being scared and didn't want to admit it. Sophie worked through math without being called on, and when Miss Alder walked by, she didn't stop at Sophie's desk. She didn't hover, she didn't stare. She just set a fresh pencil beside Sophie's worksheet when Sophie's lead snapped, and moved on without making it a moment. At dismissal, Sophie walked out with her shoulders a little looser. Ryan was waiting by the curb, Mercy sitting at his side like a calm punctuation mark. Sophie climbed into the car and immediately said, "We have to do a Community Helper Week soon." Ryan glanced at her in the mirror. "Do we?" Sophie nodded. "Ms. Alder said helpers aren't just jobs, they're choices." She hesitated, then added, "She looked like she meant it." Sarah, in the passenger seat, didn't say anything at first. She just watched Sophie's profile, the way Sophie's eyes moved, less guarded, more curious. At a red light, Sarah reached back and squeezed Sophie's knee gently, the way you do when you don't want to spook a skittish animal into thinking affection comes with strings. At home, dinner was simple: soup and bread and fruit. Ryan asked Sophie one question, only one, because he didn't want to turn her day into an interrogation. "Was it better?" he asked. Sophie dipped her bread into soup. "It was normal," she said, and then her face softened in a tiny, surprised smile. "Normal feels nice." Mercy lay under the table, head on paws, occasionally nudging a dropped crumb with the solemnity of someone cleaning up a crime scene. When Sophie's spoon clinked against the bowl, Ryan's shoulders tensed for half a beat, an old reflex, and Mercy's tail tapped the floor once, steady as a metronome. Ryan inhaled slowly, exhaled, stayed. After dinner, Sophie carried her poster into the living room. The new title strip still covered most of the old red word, but the faint shadow underneath was there if you knew where to look. It's like when you scrape your knee, Sophie said thoughtfully. It heals, but it still looks different. Ryan sat beside her on the floor. Yeah, he said quietly. Sometimes different is how we know it healed. Sophie pulled out a marker and added one small thing in the corner, a tiny drawing of Mercy's paw print. Then she paused. I want Grandma to see it. They video-called Sarah's mother, who answered with reading glasses halfway down her nose and a look that said she had been waiting for this all day. Sophie held the poster up to the camera. Well, Grandma said, squinting, that is a very handsome dog. Mercy, as if complimented directly, stood up and walked into the frame, nose nearly touching the phone. Her breath fogged the screen for a second. Grandma laughed. Oh, hello, ma'am. Please don't lick the technology. Mercy blinked slowly and then absolutely did lick the technology. Sophie giggled, a real giggle, light enough to lift the room. Even Ryan let out a quiet chuckle, the sound unfamiliar in his own ears. Grandma pointed a finger at the camera. I'm going to need a signed statement that this dog is not running the household. Sophie whispered conspiratorially. She kind of is. Sarah covered her mouth, laughing without meaning to. The laughter wasn't big, but it was honest, and it warmed the corners of the apartment like a lamp turned on in a long hallway. After the call, Sophie went to wash her hands and came back with her palms still a little damp. She sat cross-legged, then looked up at her father. Dad, she said. Yeah, bug. Sophie hesitated, choosing her words the way she chose stepping stones across a creek. When Ms. Alder didn't believe me, you looked like you knew what to do, but sometimes you look like you're somewhere else. She swallowed. Like when metal clinks. Ryan's fingers went to his dog tags instinctively, then stopped. He set his hand flat on the carpet instead, grounding himself in the present. Sarah's eyes lifted from the sink. She didn't interrupt. She simply stayed nearby, quiet support in human form. Ryan took a breath. Not a dramatic one. Just enough to tell the truth without spilling too much. There was a time, he said slowly, when someone I cared about was treated unfairly, and I stayed quiet. I told myself it was easier, safer, but it didn't feel safe later. It felt heavy. He looked at Sophie. So, when it happened to you, I didn't want to repeat that. Sophie stared at him, trying to fit the idea into her 8-year-old understanding. So, you fixed it? Ryan shook his head gently. I'm still fixing it, he admitted. Every time I choose steadiness instead of silence, I'm fixing it a little. Sophie nodded, absorbing that like a lesson that didn't hurt. Then she said very softly, Can Mercy come again next week? For the teacher meeting? Ryan glanced at Mercy, who had chosen that moment to flop onto her side with a sigh so dramatic it sounded like she paid rent. Her paw lifted lazily, as if requesting applause for existing. Sarah snorted. She's practicing her speech. Sophie smiled. She'll just sit. Ryan's mouth twitched. That's her best talent, he said. Sophie reached into her pocket and pulled out the peppermint wrapper, now flattened and smoothed. She set it beside the poster like it belonged there. Dad, she whispered, eyes suddenly serious again. Are you leaving soon? The question landed in the room with a quiet weight. Ryan didn't flinch from it. He'd learned not to. He looked at his daughter, then at the prayer card tucked in his wallet, then back at her. I have training, he said gently, but tomorrow morning, before school, we're going to do something together. Just us. And Mercy. Sophie's brows lifted. What? Ryan smiled. Small. Real. A promise, he said, and Mercy's collar ring gave the faintest clink like it agreed. The next morning, Ryan kept his promise before the school day could steal it. Sophie woke with that tender, cautious hope that felt almost like fear, and she padded into the kitchen in her socks. Ryan was already there, moving quietly, packing a lunch the way he packed everything, careful, deliberate, as if love could be folded into neat corners. "Shoes on," he said softly, "and grab your poster." Sophie blinked. "The poster too?" Ryan nodded once. "Not for the class," he said. "For you." Outside, the air was clean after the storm. The sky washed pale blue. Mercy trotted beside them, leash loose, ears alert, like she could hear kindness before it happened. They didn't go straight to the car. Ryan took Sophie to the small park a few blocks from their apartment, the one with a tired bench and a single oak tree that always looked like it was thinking. The grass still held a little dampness. A couple of sparrows argued about crumbs as if nothing important had ever happened in a classroom. Sophie sat on the bench with her poster across her knees. Mercy sat at her feet, not crowding, just present. Ryan stood for a moment with his hands in his pockets, watching the morning. When Sophie looked up, he was rubbing his thumb along something hidden in his wallet. Slow, absent, familiar. "Is that your prayer card?" Sophie asked. Ryan's hand paused. Then he pulled it out and placed it in Sophie's palm like it was something fragile and powerful at the same time. "It's not magic," he said gently. "It's just a reminder." Sophie ran her finger along the worn edge. A reminder of what? Ryan sat beside her, close enough that she could lean if she needed, but not so close she felt trapped. Mercy exhaled and rested her chin on Sophie's shoe, as if she'd decided this was the safest spot in the world. "A reminder," Ryan said, "that mercy isn't a feeling you wait for. It's a choice you make." Sophie looked down at Mercy. Like her name. Ryan's mouth softened into a small smile. Like her name. Sophie turned the card over once, twice. "Did Grandma give you this when you were little?" "Yeah," Ryan said, "when I left home the first time." He didn't add details. He didn't have to. His voice carried enough weight for Sophie to understand it had been hard. Sophie swallowed. "Does it help when metal clinks?" Ryan's gaze shifted briefly to the chain under his shirt. The dog tags made their quiet sound sometimes when he moved. Soft, harmless, but sharp inside him anyway. He breathed in slowly, then out, the way he'd taught Sophie. "It helps," he admitted. "But what helps more is doing the right thing when it's hard." Sophie stared at the poster. The new title strip covered most of the old red label, but the faint shadow underneath still existed, like a scar you could feel even when no one else could see it. "I still don't like that she wrote on it," Sophie said. Ryan nodded. "You don't have to like it," he said, "but you don't have to let it tell your story either." Sophie's fingers tightened around the prayer card. Yesterday, when she apologized, it felt weird. "Because it didn't erase what happened," Ryan said quietly. Sophie nodded. "And because I didn't know if I should forgive her." Ryan didn't rush to make forgiveness sound pretty. He didn't turn it into a lesson with a gold star. "Forgiving doesn't mean pretending," he said, "and it doesn't mean letting someone do it again." He looked at Sophie, eyes steady. "It can mean this. You accept the apology, and you keep your boundaries. You keep your truth." Sophie stared out at the arguing sparrows as if they might offer a verdict. Then she asked the question she'd been carrying like a pebble in her sock. "Are you still mad?" Ryan's jaw moved once. He thought of the briefing room years ago, the silence he'd chosen, the shame he'd watched someone else wear. He thought of Sophie standing at the front of room 12, small and brave and suddenly labeled. "I was," he said honestly, "and part of me still wants to be." Sophie looked up at him, eyes wide. Ryan touched the prayer card lightly with one fingertip. "But anger can drive a car without brakes," he said, "and I don't want you learning that's how adults solve things." Sophie's shoulders dropped a little, like she'd been carrying his anger too without meaning to. "So what did you choose?" she asked. Ryan's gaze went to Mercy, then back to Sophie. "I chose to protect you without crushing someone else," he said. "I chose steadiness." Mercy's tail tapped once against the bench leg, soft as punctuation. Sophie was quiet for a long moment. Then she slid off the bench and stood in front of Ryan, close enough that he had to look up at her. "I want to bring the poster," she said, "but not to talk again. Just to hang it." Ryan nodded. "We can do that." Sophie hesitated. "Will Ms. Alder let me?" Ryan's expression didn't change much, but something in his eyes warmed. "She will," he said, "because the policy is being written today." Sophie blinked. "Already?" Ryan nodded. "Mr. Keen's sending it to staff this afternoon, and next week there's a short training." He paused. "I'm going to be there." Sophie's mouth opened in surprised delight. "Like, you're going to teach the teachers?" Ryan gave a faint, dry smile. "I'm going to remind them," he corrected gently. "There's a difference." Sophie giggled, quick and bright. Mercy lifted her head as if she wanted to laugh too, then decided dignity was part of her brand. They walked to school a little later than usual, but no one hurried them. Ryan held Sophie's hand loosely, not leading, just walking alongside. The dog tags under his shirt clinked once when he adjusted his jacket. Clink. His shoulders tensed for a heartbeat. Then Mercy leaned her shoulder into his leg, firm and quiet. Ryan exhaled, and the tension passed like a wave that didn't get to stay. At the classroom door, Ms. Alder was already there, speaking with Mr. Keen in low tones. When she saw Sophie, she stopped mid-sentence. Her posture stiffened out of habit, then softened as if she remembered she was trying to be someone else now. Someone better. "Sophie," she said, voice careful. "Good morning." Sophie's fingers tightened around the prayer card in her pocket. She didn't hide behind her mother. She didn't stare at the floor. "Good morning," Sophie replied. Ms. Alder took a breath. "I wrote you something," she said, and held out a small envelope. No flourish, no public display. Sophie accepted it with both hands. Miss Alder's eyes flicked to the poster Sophie carried. "Would you like to hang it?" she asked, and her tone made it clear this was an invitation, not a test. Sophie nodded. Miss Alder stepped aside and let Sophie choose the spot. Not front and center, not hidden, just a place where it belonged. Sophie taped the corners carefully. The title strip sat clean across the top. Mercy's paw print in the corner looked like a quiet signature. When Sophie stepped back, the poster didn't feel like a bruise anymore. It felt like a story that had survived. Miss Alder cleared her throat. "Class," she said, and the room settled. "We're adding something new to how we do projects." She kept it short, respectful, and she didn't turn to Sophie as she said it, as if protecting Sophie from becoming the symbol of the lesson again. "Questions happen privately. We don't label each other. We don't use embarrassment to teach." No one argued. No one snickered. A few kids glanced at the poster and then back to their desks, as if it was simply part of the room now, like a bookshelf or a window. Sophie returned to her seat, and something inside her finally stopped bracing. At the curb after school, Ryan waited with Mercy as usual. Sophie ran to them, backpack bouncing, and for the first time in days she ran without looking over her shoulder. She pressed the envelope into Ryan's hand like it was important. "Read it later," she whispered, then added quickly, "Not out loud." Ryan's mouth twitched. "Yes, ma'am." In the car, Sophie unwrapped a fresh peppermint, this one from her own pocket, and offered it to Mercy first with solemn ceremony. "Dogs can't have peppermint," Sarah said, trying not to laugh. Sophie thought for a moment, then offered it to her dad. "Fine," she sighed. "Humans can have mercy too." Ryan laughed, quiet, genuine, and the sound made Sarah glance at him like she'd just spotted the sun after a long week of clouds. That night, Sophie placed her prayer card on her nightstand beside her poster's photo she'd taken on Sarah's phone. She looked at her dad from the doorway and asked the question that mattered most. "Dad," she said softly, "tomorrow. I can still tell the truth, right?" Ryan stepped close, knelt just enough to meet her eyes, and answered with the kind of certainty that didn't need volume. "Tomorrow," he said, "you tell the truth, and you tell it gently. And you remember this: being doubted doesn't make you wrong. It just means someone hasn't learned yet." Sophie nodded, slow and sure. As Ryan turned off the light, his dog tags clinked once. Soft, familiar. This time, he didn't flinch. In the dark, Mercy sighed from her spot by the bed, a long, content sound like a door closing on something that no longer needed to chase them. And in the quiet, no thunder, no spotlight, grace settled over the room the way a warm blanket does. Not flashy, not earned, just given. Tonight's miracle wasn't thunder after the storm. It was dignity returning when a child's truth was handled with care. A red, unverified label got covered, not by force but by mercy. Steady boots in a hallway, a calm K9 named Mercy, and a father choosing restraint over rage. That's how God works, through courage, boundaries, and hearts willing to learn. If you needed this story, let it remind you that tomorrow can still hold grace. In the comments, tell me what city you're listening from, and what small moment has helped you keep going lately. Please like, share, and subscribe. May God bless you, protect your home, and wrap your heart in peace.